The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Dustwood, a small frontier town on the edge of the untamed West. The midday heat blurred the edges of the wooden storefronts, and the dry wind kicked up clouds of red dust that clung to everything. The rattling of wagon wheels and the low murmur of men talking about cattle and land deals were the usual sounds. But for James, none of it mattered. James was a ragged white boy no older than 12, his once clean shirt now stained and torn, sleeves frayed at the cuffs. His tangled blonde hair fell into eyes that had seen more hardship than most men twice his age. He sat huddled in the shadow of a broken wagon wheel, clutching the meager scraps of stale bread he had scavenged that morning. The crust was hard and dry, but it was all he had to stave off the gnawing hunger. Homeless and alone, James was no stranger to the bitter sting of hunger or the cold nights spent shivering beneath an empty sky. He had learned early that the West was unforgiving to those without a roof or a family to protect them. The townfolk looked the other way or shook their heads when he passed. Some threw coins or half a sandwich, but mostly he relied on quick hands and a faster mind to survive. That day, however, something different stirred inside him. The relentless heat pushed him beyond the cramped streets of Dustwood and into the wild land that edged the town, the narrow canyon carved deep into the earth by ancient rivers. Jagged cliffs rose on either side, their faces glowing gold in the late afternoon sun. Wild sagebrush and brittle grasses swayed in a breeze that carried the fresh scent of pine and earth, a scent James hadn't smelled in months. As he walked deeper into the canyon, the air cooled and a stillness settled over the land, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The sounds of Dustwood faded away, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of a hawk circling high above. Then, in a quiet hollow, James saw him. An old man sat cross-legged on a flat rock, his back straight and proud. His weathered face was framed by a magnificent feathered headdress, the bright plumes catching the sunlight and glowing like fire. The man's eyes, deep and knowing, held a calm that seemed to steady the canyon itself. They were eyes that had seen countless seasons come and go, eyes that carried the weight of stories and wisdom. James froze, unsure whether to speak or flee. The old man's gaze met his, not with suspicion or fear, but with gentle invitation. The lines on his face softened into a warm smile as he gestured for the boy to come closer. "Sit with me, young one," the elder said softly, his voice like the whispering wind. "The land listens to those who do." With cautious steps, James approached and lowered himself beside the old man. The ground beneath them was cool and firm, a welcome contrast to the hard, dusty streets of Dustwood. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the boy's restless heart beginning to slow. Then the elder began to speak. He told stories of the stars that hung like lanterns in the night sky, of rivers that carved the land with patience and power, and of the spirits that danced in the wind and watched over the people. His words painted pictures of a world connected by roots and sky, of a history deeper than the canyons themselves. James listened, enraptured, as if waking from a long, cold dream. For the first time in many moons, he felt something he'd nearly forgotten. Hope. Hope that maybe, somewhere beyond Dustwood's dusty streets and broken promises, there was a place where he belonged, unbeknownst to them. Shadows stirred beyond the rim of the canyon, outsiders whose eyes saw not the stories held in the elder's gaze, but only land to claim and a people to push aside. And so, as the sun dipped low and the wind carried the elder's stories through the canyon, a quiet danger crept closer, threatening to shatter the fragile peace. The morning sun rose pale and weak over Dustwood, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the cracked wooden sidewalks. The town was waking slowly, but a tension hung heavy in the air, like a storm waiting to break. James awoke beneath a scraggly bush on the canyon's edge, the elder's stories still echoing in his mind. He had spent the night there, wrapped in a threadbare blanket he'd found tossed behind the general store. The promise of something new, something more than hunger and loneliness, had kindled a quiet fire inside him. But peace in the West was a fragile thing, and it didn't last long. Word had already spread through Dustwood. The old native elder, sitting alone in the canyon, had been spotted by a group of settlers passing nearby. They whispered to one another in the saloon, eyes narrowed and voices low. "Old man out there with that wild boy," they said. "He's a troublemaker. They say he's been stirring up the natives again. No good will come of it." James heard the rumors too. He tried to shake them off, but the uneasy feeling in his gut wouldn't fade. Later that afternoon, as he approached the canyon once more, voices drifted over the wind, rough, angry, and filled with menace. Through the sagebrush, James spotted a group of armed men approaching the elder's rock. Their faces were hard, weathered like his own, but their eyes held something colder, fear disguised as hatred. One of the men, a tall figure with a scar running down his cheek, spat on the ground as they closed in. "This is our land now," he snarled. "You got no right to sit here and claim it. Move on, or you'll be forced to." The elder rose slowly, his posture calm and steady despite the threat. "This land speaks to all who listen," he said quietly. "It is not yours to take." The men laughed, a cruel, hollow sound. "Words won't stop us." James's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to run, to hide where no one could find him, but something stronger held him firm. The memory of the elder's kindness, the stories that had touched a part of him long buried. As one of the men stepped forward, raising his rifle, James shouted, "Leave him alone!" The men turned, surprise flickering across their faces at the sight of the ragged boy standing between them and the elder. "What's this? The little stray thinks he can stop us?" The scarred man sneered. James squared his shoulders, voice trembling but clear. "He's not alone." "And neither am I." The tension snapped like a drawn bowstring. The men jeered but hesitated, their eyes flicking between the boy and the elder. Suddenly, from the shadows of the canyon walls, the elder raised his hand and spoke in a language James did not understand. The air seemed to shift. The men's bravado wavered. One of them cursed and turned to leave, dragging the others with him. "This ain't over, boy. You'll regret this." James watched as they disappeared down the trail, heart still racing. The elder placed a steady hand on James's shoulder. "You have courage, young one, but danger follows those who stand for what is right." James nodded, understanding that this was only the beginning. As the sun dipped low behind the cliffs, casting the canyon in deep shadows, James realized he had crossed a line. He was no longer just a homeless boy. He was a defender, a protector of something much larger than himself. And soon, that choice would bring forces far beyond Dustwood's dusty streets. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the canyon floor, painting the rugged cliffs in hues of amber and rust. James sat close to the elder, whose calm presence steadied the boy's jittering nerves. The man's deep-set eyes watched the horizon, where the angry settlers had disappeared moments before. But the danger was far from gone. James's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sudden rush of responsibility that weighed heavier than his small frame. The elder's stories had opened something inside him, a sense of belonging he'd never known, and now, that fragile connection was threatened. "You must be ready," the elder said softly, his voice like a low drumbeat. "When the world comes knocking, courage alone is not enough. You must be steady and wise." James swallowed hard. "What if I'm not strong enough?" The elder smiled, the lines of age softening into kindness. "Strength comes in many forms, young one. Not all battles are fought with fists or guns." Before James could respond, a sudden noise shattered the quiet, the harsh clatter of hooves pounding against the dry earth. "Stirring up clouds of dust. More are coming," the elder warned, standing slowly. His fingers brushed the feathers of his headdress as if drawing power from them. "They will return, and this time they will bring others." James's heart raced as he looked toward the canyon's narrow entrance, where a growing cloud of dust signaled the approach of men on horseback, rough and armed, their faces set with determination. The settlers weren't just here to chase the elder away anymore. They intended to claim this land by force. James stepped forward, his voice louder than he expected. "I won't let you hurt him." The men halted, squinting at the boy who dared to stand alone. The scarred leader dismounted and approached, spitting on the ground again. "You think you're brave, kid? This land belongs to us now. You and your old friend best get lost before things get ugly." The elder raised his hand, calm and commanding. "There is a way to peace." "But you refuse to see it," the leader sneered. "Peace? This land is made for the strong, not dreamers." James felt the heat of anger rise inside him. Anger not just for himself, but for the elder who had shown him kindness in a world full of cruelty. Without thinking, he grabbed a nearby sturdy branch and brandished it like a weapon. "Then maybe it's time you learn what strength really means." The men laughed, but their mirth was edged with unease. A dozen horses pawed the ground, restless. Guns gleamed in the late light. James and the elder stood side by side, a strange pair against the looming threat. The boy's breath came fast, but his resolve was firm. Suddenly the elder spoke in his native tongue, low and rhythmic. The wind shifted, carrying his words like a song through the canyon walls. Horses whinnied nervously, and even the settlers seemed unsettled, glancing around as if the land itself was alive and watching. James felt something stir beneath his feet, a pulse, steady and strong, as if the earth was lending its strength to the elder's words. For a moment, the hostility hung frozen in the air. Then the scarred leader growled and kicked dirt at James's feet. "Enough of this witchcraft." He raised his rifle. In that split second, time slowed. James's eyes met the elder's. No fear there, only fierce trust. And with a shout, James lunged forward, knocking the rifle aside just as a shot rang out. The bullet tore through the air, striking a nearby rock and sending a shower of sparks. Chaos exploded. The settlers drew their weapons, and James ducked behind a boulder, heart pounding like a drum. The elder moved swiftly, speaking again in the old tongue, his voice rising over the noise. Around them, the canyon seemed to pulse with life. The wind howled, and shadows danced. James knew then this was no ordinary fight. This was a battle not just for land, but for respect, for stories, for the future. He clutched his makeshift weapon tighter, ready to defend the elder, and the land that had given him hope. Because for the first time in his life, James wasn't alone. Dawn broke over the canyon with a soft pink glow, painting the cliffs in gentle light. The night's chaos had faded, but the echoes of gunfire and shouts still lingered in James's mind. He sat beside the elder, both weary but unbroken. The settlers had been driven off for now, but the battle had left a heavy silence in the air, a silence that spoke of things yet to come. James rubbed the bruises forming on his arms and legs, muscles sore from the skirmish. The elder watched him with quiet pride. "You have courage beyond your years," the elder said, voice low but steady. But today's fight was only a shadow of what's ahead. James nodded, feeling the weight of that truth settle over him like the morning fog. Suddenly, the ground beneath them seemed to hum, a soft rhythmic beat that grew louder, drawing their eyes toward the canyon's mouth. At first, it was a cloud of dust, rising like a storm on the horizon. Then shapes began to take form. Horses, hundreds of them, thundering down the trail with power and purpose. James's heart leapt in his chest. Over 100 warriors rode in, their faces painted with bold colors, feathers streaming behind them like banners in the wind. Their arrival was a force of nature, and the air seemed to crackle with energy. The elder rose, stepping forward to meet them. The warriors slowed, circling the pair as if protecting something sacred. One man, taller than the rest and adorned with a crown of eagle feathers, dismounted and approached James. His eyes were fierce but kind, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of his people's history. "We heard the courage of the boy who stood with the elder," he said. "You have protected our wisdom and our land." James looked at the warrior, unsure what to say. The elder stepped forward, translating for James. "They come with respect and with an offer." The tall warrior continued. "For years we have watched the land change, watched strangers come with greed and guns. But the boy who stood without fear shows a heart that listens. We offer you a place with us, a family, a home, and a bond between our peoples." James felt tears prick his eyes. He, the homeless boy from Dustwood, was being given a chance no one else had offered. The elder placed a steady hand on James's shoulder. This is the beginning of a new path, one of honor, courage, and unity. The warriors began to chant softly, a song carried on the wind, as if the canyon itself was blessing the moment. James stood tall, the fear and loneliness that had shadowed him for so long melting away. He was no longer just a boy lost in the wilderness. He was a defender, a bridge between worlds, and together, with these new allies, they would face whatever storms the West could throw at them. The sun hung high in the Montana sky, casting sharp shadows across the sprawling encampment where the 100 warriors had settled. Their horses grazed peacefully, the rhythmic pounding of hooves replaced by a quiet calm that felt almost sacred. James walked beside the elder, both guided by the tall warrior who had spoken for their people. The air was thick with anticipation and possibility. The warriors gathered in a wide circle around a central fire, the flames licking the dry air as smoke curled upward like whispered prayers. The elder spoke in his native tongue, and the crowd listened with reverence. James watched, fascinated by the rich tradition unfolding before him, and eager to be part of something larger than himself. Finally, the tall warrior turned to James and spoke in careful English. "We offer you more than shelter," he said. "We offer you a place among us, a new family, a new beginning. But it is not without responsibility." James's heart pounded in his chest. Responsibility. The word felt heavy but right, as if his whole life had been leading to this moment. "You will learn our ways, our stories, and our respect for the land," the warrior continued. "In return, you will protect our people, as you have already begun to do." James nodded, swallowing hard. I want to learn. I want to belong." A murmur of approval rippled through the warriors. The elder smiled proudly. That night, under a canopy of stars brighter than James had ever seen, a ceremony began. The warriors painted his face with ochre and charcoal, marking him as one of their own. Feathers were tied into his hair, symbols of honor and acceptance. As the firelight danced on their faces, James felt a deep connection to the earth beneath him and the people around him. This was more than survival. It was a rebirth. The elder pulled James aside and placed a weathered hand over his heart. "You have chosen a path of courage and respect," he said quietly. "But remember, it is a path of balance. You must listen to the land and to those who came before you." James looked up, eyes shining with determination. "I will. I promise." Days turned into weeks as James learned the ways of the tribe, how to track animals silently through the forest, read the signs of the wind, and honor the spirits that lived in the rivers and mountains. He trained with the warriors, growing stronger and wiser, yet every lesson was also a test. Could he bridge the gap between the world he came from and the world that had welcomed him? Back in Dustwood, the settlers were growing restless, their greed unquenched. But James was no longer the frightened boy they had mocked. He was a protector, a symbol of hope and unity between two worlds on the edge of collision. And when the time came, he would stand ready. The crisp morning air was thick with tension as James stood at the edge of the great clearing. Surrounded by the warriors who had become his family, the sky stretched wide and endless above them. The mountains standing as silent witnesses to the fragile peace they were about to defend. Word had reached the tribe that the settlers from Dustwood were gathering once again, angry, armed, and determined to push the native people off their ancestral lands for good. But this time James was ready. No longer the homeless boy hiding in shadows. He was a young man forged by courage, wisdom, and the bonds of kinship. The elder stood beside him, stoic and proud, his feathered headdress catching the morning sun. "Today we stand not as enemies, but as guardians of the land and its stories," he said softly. "Remember, strength is not just in the hand that holds a weapon, but in the heart that seeks understanding." James nodded, gripping the spear he had carved himself. He thought back to the lonely days wandering Dustwood streets and the moment he met the elder, when hope first took root. As the settlers rode into the clearing, the warriors met them with quiet dignity, forming a line that spoke of unity and resolve rather than violence. The scarred leader from before stepped forward, his eyes hard but wary. "You've cost us time and money." "Boy," he growled at James, "but maybe you're more trouble than you're worth." James met his gaze steadily. "This land belongs to all who respect it," he said. "We're here to protect it, for everyone's future." For a tense moment, silence held the space between them. Then, one by one, the settlers lowered their rifles, their anger giving way to reluctant respect. The elder spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "Let this be a new beginning, a chance to live together in balance, with respect for the earth and each other." In the days that followed, Dustwood changed. The settlers learned to listen as much as they spoke, and James acted as a bridge between two worlds, helping neighbors understand the wisdom held in ancient stories and the strength found in unity. James no longer wandered alone. He had found a family, a purpose, and a home. And beneath the endless Montana sky, where the wild winds sang through the canyons, a new chapter was written, one of courage, respect, and hope.